waiting for has now finally arrived.
From knockouts to tap-outs.
It's all over!
Inside the octagon and beyond.
Is this not real now? Are we pretending?
We're rich, baby. Break out the red panties.
This is the MMA Report with John Pollock.
Unbelievable! Here we go!
It's the MMA Report, and I am your host, John Pollock. Thank you for tuning in for another show here on FightNetwork.com, iTunes, however you found the show. Thank you very much. It's a fun show that we have planned. We are going to be joined later on by Valentina Shevchenko, who is headlining her second straight Fox card this Saturday night from Denver, Colorado, as she will take on Julianna Pena. It is of the belief that the winner of this fight will likely fight Amanda Nunes next. We have to always use the word likely when setting up future title contenders in the modern UFC. But Valentina Shevchenko looking to build upon her win over Holly Holm from last July, which was a fight that did surprisingly strong numbers on Fox. Maybe not so surprising. It was evidence that Holly Holm received a lot of attention after her win over Ronda Rousey, which translated against Miesha Tate at UFC 196, but that was a card that certainly the focus was not on Holm and Tate. It was on Conor McGregor and Nate Diaz, and then Holly Holm got the opportunity to showcase her drawing ability on free television last July. Let's see if Valentina Shevchenko can keep that momentum going, because the women have performed very strong on Fox over the last year. After the July card, you saw the numbers that Paige Van Zandt and Michelle Waterson did, and I feel that was the thinking in making this fight the main event, on top of the fact that these two women are fighting for the opportunity to be the next championship contender, unlike Donald Cerrone and Jorge Masvidal, who I don't feel anyone expects will be challenging for gold in their next fight, although not out of the question if Donald Cerrone wins his fifth straight fight at welterweight on Saturday night. We'll chat about the welterweights a little later on, but looking forward to having Valentina Shevchenko on the show, as I am in speaking with veteran journalist Josh Gross. He was covering the Bellator 170 event this past Saturday night at the Forum in Inglewood, California, providing coverage for Bleacher Report. We're going to chat with him about that card, the retirement of Tito Ortiz, which is a figure that Josh Gross has been covering since 2000. So we will chat about the legacy of one Tito Ortiz and some other news and notes as well. But we will get into last Saturday's card, which was the focal point of the MMA world this past weekend. That was Bellator. They were front and center. They had the night to themselves after UFC 208 was taken off of the calendar and moved to February the 11th. This was going to be a pay-per-view versus free television fight between the UFC and Bellator, but also battling in relatively similar market with Anaheim and Inglewood. But Bellator got the night to themselves, and it was a big night for the promotion, one of their biggest ever. In the main event, you know by now that it was Tito Ortiz submitting Chael Sonnen in the main event. Lots of people trying to read a lot more into the conclusion of this fight than was there. It was simply a neck crank that was identified afterwards as a rear naked choke, and Tito Ortiz submitted Chael Sonnen. Sonnen did not look outstanding at light heavyweight, had some opportunities early, was going for a Darce choke, a guillotine, but Ortiz was able to defend, mounted Sonnen, and then got to his back and applied a very difficult neck crank, which, if you have ever experienced, is incredibly painful. And I mean, had Tito Ortiz been able to hold this on, could have broken the jaw of one Chael Sonnen. So I'm not going to spend too much time into the many discussions that came out of this fight, other than to say I did not agree. And Tito Ortiz wins his final fight of his career. I feel this will be the final fight of his career. There's always going to be that next fight, that elusive fight for an individual, and especially when they go out on a stage like this for Tito Ortiz, he's always going to have that thought that, wow, I look great in that fight. Maybe I can do this one more time. What's the harm? I look great. I'm depriving myself as time is ticking away. But I really hope Tito Ortiz can look at this. This was one of the great send-offs in mixed martial arts history. Had his son in the cage with him, who walked him down to the fight, down the ramp, and then afterwards exiting with the big thank you Tito sign on the board as they went off the air. The announcers laid out. It was a great scene to cap off the career of a very instrumental figure in the growth and success of mixed martial arts. And he transferred that over from the UFC to Bellator. The initial rating that came out on Monday had this card averaging just under 1.4 million viewers and peaking for the main event with 1.8 million, which would be the third highest in Bellator history. So not quite at the level of the big Kimbo Slice fights, but right at the number that Tito did with Stephan Bonner. And since then, Spike has provided new information, which I believe includes all of the DVR viewership in the 3 days afterwards, and state that 2.2 million watched the main event. And they also added that 2 million watched Paul Daley knocking out Brendan Ward, which could be our knockout of the year. This was spectacular. The flying knee that put Brendan Ward to sleep. It was an ugly scene after where Brendan Ward had to be taken out on a stretcher. The photo was posted online. I mean, it just looked awful. And we wish Brendan Ward a speedy recovery, but this was a vicious knockout by Paul Daley. And that was getting a lot of discussion coming out of this card. And it was one of those cases. It was the first time it felt like the idea Bellator would have, where you put your two stars in the main event and you hope that people tune in and watch some of the other fighters on the card. This was the first time where you had discussion coming out of another fight beyond just the main event components to a given card. I mean, last February you had kind of the double main event of Royce Gracie, Ken Shamrock, Kimbo Slice, and Dada 5000, but it hasn't been able to transfer yet to star power, or should I say drawing power, for those that have been coupled with those big superstars in the main event. And with Paul Daley coming off a knockout like this, I mean, the idea has been thrown out. We'll chat about it more with Josh Gross. The idea of a Paul Daley-Michael Page fight is certainly out there. Paul Daley challenged Rory McDonald after the fight as well. So Paul Daley is someone in his next fight. We'll see how much of this audience transfers over to a card that is maybe just headlined by Paul Daley and a name opponent. Another element to these big Bellator shows, they make them feel like big events. They feel important, and they realize this. This is where we have a big audience, and let's not just present what we've been building up, but let's give them something to take away and more fights that are coming up. And they did a great job of focusing on Matt Mitrione and Fyodor Emelianenko for February 18th, and also announcing Mohamed Kingmo Lawal and Quinton Jackson, who will have a rematch on March the 31st. This time, it's going to take place at heavyweight. And I would imagine that this may signal the end of Quinton Jackson's days at light heavyweight. If he is just going to primarily fight at heavyweight at this point, we shall see. They had a very close fight back in 2014. Many felt Lawal won that fight, and it was awarded to Quinton Jackson, a unanimous decision no less, in May of 2014. So they will do that fight once again at the heavier weight class. But overall, I think a pretty strong night for Bellator, presenting one of their big shows. I don't expect that momentum to carry forward to this Friday night, where they're back immediately with Melvin Gillard and Chidi Njokwani. But the card is, I mean, this is not a tentpole event on Friday night. This is one of the lesser Bellator cards. But if you look, AJ McKee, certainly a rising prospect. And on the prelims, heavyweight Tyrell Fortune is fighting, and I would imagine that should he look good in that fight, it's short enough that will definitely get replayed on the main broadcast, as he is certainly one of the big crop of prospects that Bellator is grooming. This past week, it was made official, the fight many were anticipating, and logically, the only fight that made sense for the light heavyweight championship, Daniel Cormier and Anthony Johnson, is set for April the 8th to headline UFC 210 in Buffalo, New York. This was originally scheduled for Toronto at UFC 206, so if you were planning to see them in Toronto, it's a very short drive down to Buffalo to see them this time around for the 205-pound championship. Again, a rematch, and this one from May of 2015 involving Cormier and Johnson, where Johnson nearly stopped Daniel Cormier, almost had the distinction of being the only man to finish Daniel Cormier, but Cormier came back in that fight, and it was Johnson who tired, and Cormier ended up becoming the then interim light heavyweight champion back at UFC 187 in 2015. This time around, I'm sure that there's going to be a heavy focus on Anthony Johnson and the state of the Blackzilians. That has played itself out in public, very much so, with Rashad Evans, who recently spoke about the problems on the MMA Hour with Ariel Helwani, and somewhat of the splintering of the Blackzilians and whether or not they still exist. And for Anthony Johnson, I'm sure he's going to downplay any issues, but you want to have a concentrated and solid camp. You don't want to be worried about changes and problems with anyone involved. So Anthony Johnson getting ready for a championship fight, I'm sure there's going to be a big focus on that camp. Another interesting note is that since the ABC rules were passed last summer, they went into effect on January 1st, there is a segment of commissions that are not adopting the new rules because it is within the commission's rights, commission by commission, to acknowledge these rules that were passed by the ABC. The ABC is not, they do not have the jurisdiction to just simply instruct all commissions that they have to abide by this. It's just the commissions go along with what is essentially a recommendation. And we spent a lot of time on this last August, right after the meeting, going through the technicalities of the rules passed and kind of, through the broadcast of the hearings each day and the presentations, you kind of got a sense into some of these commissions and what we're dealing with. But that plays into this Saturday because in Colorado, they are one of those commissions that are not going to be abiding by the new rules. So a grounded opponent is someone that can simply have one finger touching the mat, and that is thus a grounded opponent. You can have your hands extended with your fingers towards your opponent's eyes. You don't have to subscribe to the damage, domination, and duration criteria of scoring a 10-8 round. And I hope that this is something temporary, that we can get the commissions on board, because there's nothing we need more than more confusion amongst the audience as to what the rules are and trying to explain to them that this weekend, this is legal, and next weekend, it's illegal. That to me is the complete antithesis of what was the whole point in 2001 of creating a unified set of rules. And now they are not unified. So this will be an issue. And I feel every week we're going to have to tell you which rules are in effect for this weekend's cards. And it's problematic. Some other fight news, Travis Brown and Derek Lewis, they were moved from the UFC 208 card in Brooklyn, and they will now serve as the headline fight in Halifax Sunday night, February 19th. That was reported by Kevin Iole of Yahoo Sports, and since confirmed by the UFC, Halifax needed a main event badly after Junior Dos Santos and Stefan Struve fell apart with Struve's injury. There were no heavyweights available for Junior Dos Santos, so Dos Santos now without an opponent and unknown when he will fight next. So Halifax, for a fight night card, they're now getting Travis Brown, Derek Lewis, and Johnny Hendricks will fight Hector Lombard, with Hendricks moving up to 185 pounds. Those will be the two key fights on the Halifax card next month. And UFC 211 is now scheduled for Dallas, Texas on May the 13th. That was another news item reported by Kevin Iole. So it does not appear that the UFC will be running Las Vegas over Memorial Day weekend, which they had been their tradition for many years for Memorial Day weekend to hold their May pay-per-view. And then that stopped last year with 198 taking place in Brazil. And this year going to Dallas, Texas. No fights this early for that particular card. And I mentioned the welterweights, and it's an interesting time for the welterweight division in the UFC. Tyron Woodley is going to fight Stephen Thompson at UFC 209, March the 4th. We also have Donald Cerrone and Jorge Masvidal coming up this weekend. Outside of that, the amount of contenders in that top 15 that are either on the sidelines, are hurt, or just had a fight, there are so many welterweights that are not booked. It's the opposite of the heavyweight division where Stefan Struve gets hurt and all of a sudden Junior Dos Santos has no opponents because he's either just fought them in the case of Ben Rothwell, or they're not available. and they're booked in fights. It's a division where everyone is accounted for in one way or another. At welterweight, looking here at the UFC rankings, we have Robbie Lawler, who has no fight scheduled, has left American Top Team, and we don't know what is next for him. Damian Maia is in this very awkward position where he's had this incredible win streak, but no title fight on the horizon for one Damian Maia. And the question is whether he'll have to take a fight in between time or just wait it out. The man should fight for a championship based on what he has done. Carlos Condit is another guy that we don't know what is up with him and if he's even going to fight again. Lorenz Larkin is a free agent. Dong-Yun Kim and Neil Magny, they just fought at the end of December. Rick Story doesn't have a fight. Gunnar Nelson was hurt and had to pull out of his last fight. Johnny Hendricks moving up to 185. Tarek Safadine just fought. Matt Brown fought Donald Cerrone at the beginning of December. He doesn't have a fight lined up yet and is also going to be part of the coaching staff for TJ Dillashaw on The Ultimate Fighter. And then you have Jake Ellenberger, who again fought not all that long ago at the beginning of December, but again, not booked for a fight. So welterweight has so many different directions it can go in. I'm not even mentioning the likelihood of a George St. Pierre return, a Nick Diaz return. There are so many different options. Does Conor McGregor want to fight at 170 again? A lot of interesting developments that could happen at 170 pounds in 2017 and where that championship ends up. I'll say Tyron Woodley could look like one of the great welterweights of all time if he is holding this title by the end of the year, based on which contenders emerge. If he defeats Stephen Thompson in March, does that set up a fight with Damian Maia? If Donald Cerrone wins on Saturday, that's 5 in a row at welterweight for Cerrone. And you're weighing the options of a Cerrone versus a Damian Maia. I mean, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on what your interest is, I mean, there's a lot of arguments that Donald Cerrone could leapfrog a Damian Maia, for instance. Could those two fight one another? If Jorge Masvidal wins, that throws a monkey wrench into those plans immediately. But that's a weight class I'm certainly intrigued by this year to see the many different possibilities that are at the disposal of the UFC and their matchmaking for 2017. All right. We will come back after this. We're going to be joined by Josh Gross, who not all that long ago launched a new podcast. It's the Outsiders podcast that he, along with Sherdog founder Jeff Sherwood, are doing now on a weekly basis. We're going to chat about that podcast as well as Josh's coverage of Bellator 170 from this past Saturday when we come back on the MMA Report.
How should people remember your legacy in this sport, your icon status?
Well, I started in this as as an amateur. And that was with our our other company, or the other company I competed with, UFC. I'll go ahead and say the name, fuck it. As an amateur, I fought for no money. I fought for free. That was the beginning of my career. I fought for free. And all my friends said, "You're crazy." I said, "I want to compete. I want to see how good I can be in this sport." A year and a half later, I became the world champion. From a kid being on the street with parents that at the time didn't want to be parents, and to go through the stuff I went through, I'm very lucky to be where I am today. And it's from hard work and dedication that I've been able to do this dream. Tonight was a dream. Tonight seemed like a movie. It seemed like it wasn't even real. When Chael was tapping, I thought that he was trying to get my hands off. All I had, nothing against McCarthy. I'm trying to slam my head against my head, probably against the ground. But I was just holding on because I didn't think it was over. I thought it was still going. But it seemed like a movie. It was just weird. But this is the way a person's career should end.
It feels so good to be back. I scrutinize every word, memorize every line. I spit it once, refuel, re-energize every
Welcome back, everybody, to the MMA Report. It's John Pollock with you, and it's a real pleasure to be joined by this man. You can catch all of his work at The Guardian, Bleacher Report. Of course, he was the author of the very well-received Ali vs. Inoki, the forgotten fight that inspired mixed martial arts book, which is available on Amazon. Veteran journalist Josh Gross with us. Josh, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really great. How are you?
I'm doing well. First off, congratulations, by the way. I saw the New York Times labeled your book as one of the 40 to read throughout 2016. That is quite the honor. And I read the book. We chatted about it at the time. It's an excellent book, and I just wanted to congratulate you off the top for that distinguishable honor.
I appreciate that. Let me just say it was the New York Post.
Oh, okay.
If someday I'm so lucky to be recognized by the Times, I'd be honored by that. But the Post, tremendous for them to include that. I really, they're fans of the book over there. I really appreciate their putting it out like that. It was amazing.
Before we discuss Bellator, as you start to see all of the discussion about Floyd Mayweather and Conor McGregor, as someone that got right into the weeds about how this improbable fight occurred in 1976, and you now transfer it to modern day and trying to work out a fight like this, is this just mind-blowing to you that this is actually in the discussion phase and is something that maybe there is a sliver of reality to, that this could occur in 2017 or beyond?
Yeah, it's hard to know how much reality it really, it is.
Right.
The sense is that, like, even if there's some good feelings on all sides, there's so many hurdles to get in the way of it that it's hard to sort of get behind and feel positive about it. It's like a real fight. And then if they make it, you ask yourself, like, well, what is it? Do we really need to see Conor McGregor fight Floyd Mayweather in a boxing bout? Obviously not. I mean, if you're just looking for a pure sports/entertainment spectacle, I guess, hey, 76, they did it. You go, like I said, we go back to the 1920s. Jack Dempsey is trying to take on the best wrestler. If they're going to do it, I've written about it a bunch. I wrote about it for The Guardian. If they're going to do it, I would love to see Floyd step up and, like, do an MMA, like, they 1-on-1. And if somehow, like, if they need to do a rubber match, you flip a coin. It's already a pipe dream. I'm just saying, make it, go all the way with it. Like, see what you can do. I think the public would be really interested in a scenario like that. A one-off like boxing, okay. I mean, sure, just take their money, but it's not healthy for fans, I don't think.
Well, as we look into the rearview mirror to the Forum on Saturday night, you were there covering the event. It was Tito Ortiz's retirement fight. And I've got to say, Josh, watching this at home, you don't get these kinds of moments too often in mixed martial arts where you get the send-off of all send-offs, which is what it felt like with Tito Ortiz winning this fight, having his family there, cage side, his son is in the ring, and you go off the broadcast with Tito just walking up the ramp. It felt like a real good, feel-good moment. What was the vibe like in the arena for Tito?
I think that describes it pretty well. It came across on TV, it sounds like. Definitely, Tito had a night that he'll never forget. And, you really kind of hope after a night like that he does stay away, that the temptation doesn't get to him and that he's made the decision. He knows what he wants to do. I feel like it is the case with Tito because he's always been such a fighter. For him to make a statement like, I don't want to do it anymore, he's going to have good reason and be committed to that. And so, it was a really nice send off and, he had a pretty good time of it against Chael Sonnen. High profile match for him. Lots of people watched. I think in the end, the final ratings will be about 2 million for the main event. And, that's definitely a great send off for Tito Ortiz. And he's the kind of fighter that deserves it.
You brought it up in the press conference, asking Tito kind of how he is going to view his own contributions to mixed martial arts. As someone that has covered him for the length of time you have, Josh, I mean, where is your placement of Tito Ortiz and kind of the foundation of just the building blocks we have seen in mixed martial arts and Tito's role in that?
Really critical fighter. When Zuffa came in 2001, they leaned heavily on Tito. Dana White used to manage Tito. And, for all their problems over the years, they still maintain that kind of dynamic. It's an interesting relationship. They've always had one. And Tito's a guy that I think for a lot of reasons should be remembered. And I consider him a pioneer and an icon. And I try not to throw around those words too loosely. He was a terrific fighter. He was a multiple time defending champion in the light heavyweight division, which was the marquee division in the UFC. He's a guy that stood up for himself and he branded himself right away. People knew about him, the T-shirts, the bad boy, the feud with the Lions Den, all the sort of things that he did along the way. It really was an impressive career. I think you have to look at Tito Ortiz. And, he had some rougher moments, but, unlike a lot of fighters in his era, he was never associated with PEDs, never caught with a banned substance. A lot of his peers were, Chael Sonnen, certainly in that group. I think he deserves credit for that. And, he is certainly someone who's elevated himself through mixed martial arts. He's got a great legacy.
Where do you see the course of Zuffa going had UFC 40 not gone down as it had, which was the first Tito Ortiz, Ken Shamrock fight? To me, that's a real pivotal event in UFC history at that time in 2002.
Yeah, again, I think you're right. I was there that night and definitely remember the feeling among the people in the UFC, the fighters, the energy in the crowd. It felt like a turning point. It really did. It felt like here's Zuffa. They've kind of figured out that they can sell this fighting in a larger way. They just need a storyline. They really need to work on packaging it. And I think they took a step up. For them, that was definitely an event that took them to another level. And of course, they, transcended that 10 times over. But that was a pivotal moment in their early history, no question. I think the fans in the building at the MGM recognize that.
Do you think that history, how do you feel history views Tito Ortiz and his legacy? Because there was a time that Tito was very outspoken about pay, especially ahead of the first Chuck Liddell fight. And he was largely maligned by a lot of people in the public. And these are issues that are brought up today. And the audience is very much pro-fighter these days. And that wasn't always the case, especially when Tito was raising up a lot of these issues. He has his good and bad, and you could probably fill up both columns with examples. But do you think as history looks back at Tito Ortiz, it's a more favorable one? Or do you think it's pretty fair to him?
No, I think it will come into focus as more fair. He was a guy that battled the UFC, and there was a lot of turmoil with the promotion, and so some of the fans turned on him. Obviously, the UFC in certain ways used their PR machine and their voice to bully pulpit against him. But he always stood up for fighter pay, for himself, for branding rights, for all those sorts of things. He was way ahead of the curve. And as I was talking about his legacy, I didn't talk about them directly, but just him being aware of his value, that was always something on Tito's mind, and he was never afraid to ask what he thought he deserved. And, that's something that not a lot of fighters did in that era. And, it was much more, I felt like, we're all on this train together. We got to survive together. How dare you step out of line and ask for something right now? You're going to kill us. I think that was the way that the UFC often reacted to these things. But Tito didn't care. He was about himself. He had to get his, and he was a part of a lot of great fights, and he made some money in his career, and he seems to be doing very well for himself. So I think all things together, he put really a solid 20 years in, and he's walking away from the sport in a lot better condition than many, many other fighters have.
It was a tremendous farewell that was orchestrated on Spike TV through Bellator. But now, how does Bellator pivot from this event? You're left with Chael Sonnen, who did not look all that great on Saturday night. He is someone that you have down for 5 more fights under his deal. As you watch Bellator continue to evolve, it's clear of trying to attract these marquee names and also build from the bottom. And hopefully the end result is a solid nucleus. How close are they to kind of realizing what Scott Coker has in mind, in your opinion, as they move forward now, post Tito Ortiz? And that's going to be the case for a number of these older fighters, that they're not long-term solutions.
Sure. I think they're positioned, and they feel like they're positioned to really break out in 2017. And it feels that way looking at them, that, at the very least, they're going to make a big push. Whether it works in the end, where the ratings match the investment, unclear, but they're definitely going to make an effort in terms of elevating their brand, their status in the space this year. I had a really good conversation with Scott Coker the day of that weigh-in, the press conference at Viacom, where Tito and Chael kind of went back and forth, and just a fun 30 minutes of listening to those guys. Scott talked a lot about what their plans are and where they are and what he's done in terms of building the promotion. He feels like they're turning the switch now. A lot of the younger fighters are ready to take tougher fights. These veterans that they've come to sort of pull in and rely on and sell tickets are making big fights. You go from Tito, Chael to Fedor, Mitrione, Fedor, and a lot of people are going to be excited. And then you go to, King Mo and Rampage Jackson in March. They're trying to throw these big events once a month, plus very, very bold moves internationally. They are doing a lot international because of the Viacom relationship. I think more than anything, people need to understand, and it sort of always gets lost, but the Bellator relationship, it's not even a relationship. I mean, they are a property of Viacom, and Viacom is a major media conglomerate. And for them, the MMA business, especially as international it is really attractive. And that's the mood in the company in Viacom. There's no question that there's major support there for Bellator, and I think they'll really get a push this year.
It feels that the Houston event last year, which was the Shamrock Gracie rematch, Kimbo and Dada, I mean, the build up to that, it certainly had its interest level because of these large personalities, but the fallout was certainly, it feels like Bellator had a realization of how far we can go with this. And it seems that there was a bit of a transformation after that event where you see the fighters that they are showcasing, even your Chael Sonnens, who it's not absurd that this guy is still fighting at his age, and having that right balance, Josh, of guys with name value without kind of crossing that line to where it's something that in the wake of that event, you almost felt dirty from the end result of everything that came out of that show.
Yeah, I feel dirty. That was pretty nasty stuff. And they were criticized for it and should have been criticized. But hey, I mean, what's the message that they take away? Because that was the largest viewership that they've had. I think that's Kimbo more than anything else. I mean, he's always driven an audience in a way that no one ever really quite could. So he was unique. And, I feel like that they have to get away from, there's a fine line for them. They want to promote these fights between veteran fighters. They don't want to do it, sort of the BJ Penn, Yair Rodriguez kind of matchups. Coker said that directly. He thinks they're a mistake. Mm-hmm. But he feels like it's okay to put these veterans together in fights. And, I suppose there's a lot of people who are going to be interested in that. They need to do, right in terms of the matchmaking. I think especially, with some of their prospects, a lot of people wanted to see Michael Page get a step up in competition. I say put him with Paul Daley, who looked great in Los Angeles. I mean, put that fight in London. That's a promotable, sellable fight between two guys. They're enough, I think they've done enough to protect MVP. And that's really the question, is like some fighters get a certain push, some fighters get a different sort of route. The promoters and matchmaker at Bellator, Rich Chu and Scott Coker and Mike Kogan, they are really sort of going to dictate a lot of this. But, they feel comfortable that they're putting together the fights that are the right ones for their fighters, and then also will appeal to an audience that, is, they can attract a more casual audience, and they don't have to sell on pay-per-view. That's not the goal. It's just about getting eyeballs on it, and some of these matchups, that's all they're designed for.
Before I let you go, Josh, as someone that saw the formation of the unified rules in 2001, and now, effective January 1st, we have seen the new rules that were passed through the ABC last summer come into effect, and now we have this divide where the rules are not unified, and we have commissions that are subscribing to the new rules and others that are not. Is this something that you feel can sustain, where we're going to have this fractured model, or is it imperative that these commissions get on the same page and we get back to a unified set of rules? What is your gut takeaway with commissions that can at sometimes be very stubborn with one another?
Sure. I think there's a lot of turf wars and there's a lot of regulatory weirdness going on behind the scenes. A lot of it has to do with athletic regulators in states that didn't want to go along with the rules change to the ABC. And so it's a bit territorial right now. I think it'll get sorted out, but it's a story to watch. Anytime you get these states kind of feuding with each other, I think there's a lot of interest among the state regulators and people who are part of the ABC in terms of, whether this Muhammad Ali Expansion Act passes, because that would seem to give the ABC all of a sudden a ton more power in terms of regulation over MMA. And I would imagine if that's the case, then whatever they follow is what, states around the country are going to have to follow. That may be the end game. But it's interesting to watch them feud behind the scenes, and, people make comments. I definitely heard some comments from people associated with commissions in the last week or so, and it's kind of interesting to see the backfighting. I think it'll get resolved, and I just hope so, because it really can get confusing. For nobody else but the fighters. From state to state, from fight to fight, to have to think about I can do this, but I can't do that. I don't think it's healthy for anybody. It's different than going to another country where the expectation's there, but just because you're in another state doesn't make sense. And so someone's got to make an argument and win, and I think they will.
As I mentioned, you can catch Josh's work for The Guardian, Bleacher Report there in the MMA section. The Ali versus Inoki book is up on Amazon. I highly recommend that. And Josh, you're also back in the podcast game along with Jeff Sherwood. Where can listeners check out that show as well that you guys are doing now?
Yeah, kind of doing a thing. I've done podcasts a lot of my life and never really figured out how to make a buck doing them. I'm not the best businessman, I got to say, but we're asking people to sign up on Patreon and listen. That's $3 a month. And, we've had some great support already. It's fun to get back on and sort of just talk with Jeff, who's I've known forever, was an old boss of mine at Sherdog, and he's got some great stories. So people seem to be digging it, and I'm enjoying doing it again. But it's always fun to get on there and talk, as you know.
Always great to chat with Josh Gross, and you can follow him on Twitter. He's got to have the strangest handle to explain verbally, but it is YAY_YEE. You definitely have to know who you're looking for to find him on Twitter. Josh Gross, one of the best to cover mixed martial arts. I highly, highly recommend following his work, as I imagine most of you are. When we return, we are going to be joined by Valentina Shevchenko. She will be taking on Julianna Pena Saturday night, 5 rounds at 135 pounds on Fox. It's Valentina Shevchenko up next on the MMA Report. Stay tuned.
Your last fight against Amanda Nunes, who is now the UFC bantamweight champion, was an extremely close fight where you had won the 3rd round. Give us your thoughts about a potential rematch with the now current champion.
Amanda, she's a good fighter. She has good standing, good ground game. And, of course, I want rematch for Nunes-Amanda for the title belt.
There's a bullet in the gun. There's a fire in your heart. You will move all mountains that stand in your path.
Welcome back to the program. It's John Pollock with you on the MMA Report. The UFC is back on Fox this Saturday night, 8 p.m. Eastern. It's going to be headlined by female bantamweight action as Julianna Pena will be taking on the woman that joins us now on the phone. She is Valentina Shevchenko, who is in Denver and has spent her camp in Colorado. Valentina, how are you doing today, just a few days out from this big fight?
I'm feeling great, very concentrated and very motivation, and ready for the fight this Saturday, and will give all my best to take the victory.
Is fight week something that you enjoy, where the attention to the fight, it ramps up significantly? You're doing a lot of media. Are you one of those fighters that just wants to get to the fight on Saturday night, or can you relax during fight week?
It's both. It's like for some part of the day we are doing all this stuff like media. It takes a little bit energy, but we have time on the afternoon to recover, to go to training and focus on preparation. So it's like it's a job what professional fighters used to do every time, and this is like I feel very good, and nothing can destroy me from my concentration.
I saw another interview you did where you spoke about the fact that so many fighters, they will get caught up in all of the back and forth talk and all of that. You focus more on just the action on Saturday night, the actual fight. Do you think a lot of fighters, they kind of fall into that trap where you're so focused on promoting the fight and responding to different quotes and such that you lose focus on the actual fight that is happening that weekend?
Each fighter, it's different. For example, for me, it's my better way to be focused on the fight. For other fighters, for example, they can do both things. For other ones, they are distracting for the fight. So I think it all depends on the person.
When you made the decision to come to Colorado for this fight camp, tell us just a bit about the experience and getting used to elevation, because many fighters have cited that it's something that they never think it's going to be as big a deal, and sometimes it turns out to be. How long did it take you to get used to training at this level in Colorado?
For example, about the altitude, I can say that every time I was feeling me very good on altitude, because I was born in Kyrgyzstan. It's very high mountain country, and all my fights, all my trainings, I was spent in altitude. So, and when we moved to Peru 8 years ago, there is a lot of places like Arequipa, Cusco, Puno. It's very high elevation too. So, and was every time training there. So I never had any difficulties to training on altitude, and I really feel here like at home.
How was it training over Christmas? Did you take any kind of a break for Christmas, or was it training right through the holidays?
It was training every time, but on the night it was celebration.
And what was the experience like at training at the Grudge Training Center? A lot of notable fighters that train out of there. Rose Namajunas, of course, Trevor Whitman, a very well-respected coach. What was that experience like being with a different camp and training with them?
It was a very great experience, and to train in a 303 training center with Rose, with Shannon, with JJ, with other boys, Joe. It was great, but every time I have my coach, Pavel Fedotov, he every time looking for my process of the training, and he control all my conditions, and he's every time looking for to make me best fighter.
Can you talk a bit about, the relationship between a fighter and a coach? It's something that sometimes it's very difficult to find that perfect chemistry, but you and working with Pavel throughout your entire career, was that a chemistry that was instant, Valentina? Was it something that evolved over time where the two of you just understood one another on that level?
For sure, he know me like the same like my family knows me, because I training with him since I've been 5 years old. And I know exactly how I feel. He just look at me and already know what I want or what else. But I have a lot of respect for him. That's why I understand that on the training every time, like when he said something, I have to do it. It's not like, oh no, I don't feel good. That's why I want to do this exercise. Not exercise. No, it's every time. Even if I'm tired, I know if he said it, I have to do it, because on the fight it will help me very much.
When you reflect on the win you had over Holly Holm last July, that was a fight where it had a lot of attention. Again, it was a main event on Fox, on network television in the U.S. Did you find that you received a lot more attention after that win against Holly Holm?
For sure, it was great fight. It was great opponent, and I did all my best to take the victory, because I knew that I have everything to take this victory. And of course, each success fight, it makes you more like to receive more attention from every person. It's a very great feeling. But on the other side, after, for example, some days, 1 week or a little bit more, I understand that it's already has passed. And I have to start to focus on my new obstacle, new fight. And this is what I start to focus on the next fight.
Do you have a preference of a 3-round fight versus a 5-round fight? Because against Holly, you showed a lot of patience, and Holly started to make some mistakes in that particular fight. Do you prefer having that longer period of time, such as you do this Saturday night with Julianna?
Yes, it will be 5 rounds, so it's not like a sprint, it's all marathon. So I have to be in the great conditions. But if it will be like if I can finish by KO, by submission or whatever, it will be great. But I have to be ready for all time for not receiving any surprises on the fight.
Do you feel, when you bring up conditioning, I think that's an element everyone is looking at this fight because of the fact that Julianna has never fought a 5-round fight. She did not train in Colorado for this particular fight. Is that what you look at this Saturday night, that this could be a fight that very well could go into those championship rounds, and conditioning may be one of the biggest factors of this fight?
Yes, it's many factors, but more condition is one of these. But more, I think it's my concentration and motivation for the fight. I consider it's like the major factor for winning this fight.
How are you able to distance? I mean, this fight on Saturday, you have to have tunnel vision on the obstacle in front of you. But when you're seeing everybody talk about the winner of this fight getting a championship fight, are you able to just keep that out of your out of your mind at this moment, not overlook anything or what might be at stake in this fight and just focus on Julianna? Is there any difficulty in doing that, knowing what this fight represents?
No, for me it's not difficult, but because every time, it's by my nature, I every time focus on what I have in front of me. And it's what will come after, it will come after. But more important, being present. Of course, like make it present the best way you can and then focus on the future.
Would you say you are a moderately different fighter than the one of even a year ago as you were preparing for Amanda Nunes this time last year? How much different are you as a fighter and what you have gained over the past year? This last year, I've been focused more on the training, like exactly MMA style, and take the best skills from my Muay Thai background and put it on tactic of the fight, like strategy of the fight, exactly for MMA fight. And of course, I'm very glad that I never stopped to grow up. And I feel like from 1 year ago, I'm now much better than I was. And it makes me very happy because I know I don't stop to progress, and I every time go forward. It's very good. I think it's more important for fighter. And last thing, do you have any plans after the fight? Are you going to go on a vacation? Are you going to celebrate Christmas a month later? Do you have any plans after the fight?
For sure, I will have some rest to recover all my energy. But in the same time, my oldest sister, she will defend her line fight Muay Thai world title in March 3. So I will have rest during some days, and then I will help her in her preparation for her defense of the title fight.
Well, I want to wish you all the best going into Saturday. Really looking forward to this fight, Valentina, and thank you so much for this time.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
That was Valentina Shevchenko, who headlines Saturday's card in Denver. And we'll take a quick look at the card before we wrap up this edition of the MMA Report. The prelims will kick off really early. We're on the Fox schedule, 4 p.m. Eastern time on Fight Pass. And if there is a fight deep on this card to pay attention to, I would definitely recommend Alexandre Pantoja and Eric Shelton. Both were flyweights on the most recent season of The Ultimate Fighter. Pantoja was the number 1 ranked flyweight based on the rankings they created for the show. And Eric Shelton is someone that he has a lot of talent. And I feel that with some more experience, he is going to mature into something at 125 pounds. I'm very much looking forward to this fight. If you watched the last season of The Ultimate Fighter, there were some great fights from the flyweights on that season, and I'm looking forward to this fight. It's on Fight Pass along with JC Cottrell and Jason Gonzalez on the television portion of the prelims on FS1, I should say, 5 p.m. Eastern time. Listen, there's not a whole lot here to really dig into. The two key ones, Rafael Sunsao and Aljamain Sterling will meet at 135 pounds. That's an important fight for both individuals, both coming off losses after significant win streaks. Sunsao losing to TJ Dillashaw in their rematch last July at UFC 200, and Aljamain Sterling to Brian Caraway in his last outing. He was supposed to fight in Albany last month, but was removed from that card and returns this Saturday night. Very tough fight to prognosticate. I feel that Aljamain Sterling gets the victory in this one. He believes his wrestling will be a big difference maker, but we shall see. Sunsao, extremely talented bantamweight that a lot of people sleep on at times, but a guy that does hold a victory, even though it was avenged over TJ Dillashaw when they first fought in October of 2013. And then at middleweight, we have Sam Alvey, who's won his last 3, taking on Nate Marquardt, who has lived and died on the knockout in his last 3 fights. And this is a guy that has certainly been through the wars over his lengthy career and will be headlining the prelim card on Saturday night. The prelims kick off at 5 Eastern on FS1. And then the main card, 8 Eastern on Fox. You've got Alex Caceres taking on Jason Knight. This should be a real fun fight. I think that these two should have a very entertaining fight. Knight, very young, just 24 years of age. He dropped a decision in his first fight in the UFC to Tetsuya Kawajiri, and then has come back with wins over Jim Ehlers and Daniel Hooker by decision. Caceres, who has been a stalwart within the UFC for years at this point, has gone 2-1 since his decision to come back to the featherweight division, and holding decision wins over Masio Fulin and Cole Miller. And his last fight headlined a fight night card against Yair Rodriguez and losing a split to Rodriguez. Andrei Arlovski and Francis Ngannou, one of those potentially changing of the guard kind of fights. Ngannou has never fought anyone at this level of an Andrei Arlovski, someone who was not even aware of mixed martial arts up until a couple of years ago. An incredible amount of power that Ngannou possesses. And I mean, he is an orthodox fighter, but also someone that can slip into southpaw as well and has power in that left hand, which is worth watching. And his last fight, where he just lifted Anthony Hamilton by a Kimura and just nearly ripped his arm off, was something to behold. But with wins over Luis Henrique, Curtis Blades, Bojan Mihailovic, and Anthony Hamilton, certainly fighting a former champion in Andrei Arlovski is a significant increase. Arlovski had a very rough 2016, stoppage losses at the hands of Stipe Miocic, Alistair Overeem, and Josh Barnett, who, I mean, you look at that level that he's fighting. I mean, you have the current UFC heavyweight champion, a K1 Grand Prix champion, and another former champion in Josh Barnett. Those are quality opponents that Andrei Arlovski lost to. However, that followed a 6-fight win streak for Arlovski. This may be must win for Arlovski at this point. 4 losses is tough, no matter what day and age you're talking about, especially at heavyweight. Donald Cerrone and Jorge Masvidal, this could be fight of the night. I think this is such a hard fight to look at and make a prediction in. Donald Cerrone had a great 2016, all of his fights at welterweight, 4-0 throughout the year. Most recently defeating Matt Brown with an unbelievable head kick, but certainly took some damage in that fight. Knocked down at one point in the second round by Matt Brown. Masvidal is someone that, I mean, he's lost some really close fights, which I think has altered some perception of him and how talented a welterweight he is. Coming off of wins over Ross Pearson back in July at UFC 201 and the Jake Ellenberger fight. Unfortunately, everyone pays attention to how that fight ended with Ellenberger's foot getting trapped in the cage. And it was kind of a weird ending to a fight that Masvidal was looking very good in. His striking was on point up until that finish, that very strange TKO finish. Jorge Masvidal winning this fight completely viable and would really halt the momentum of one Donald Cerrone, who, you look at what this guy has done. 19-4 in his tenure in the UFC, which next month, just a couple of weeks away actually, will be his 6-year anniversary since debuting in the UFC back in 2011. He's won 12 of his last 13 fights, unbeaten so far at welterweight. This is a guy that he has so many different options. One of the keys that maybe is worth focusing on is the most success that Ross Pearson had in their fight. And Ross Pearson certainly lost that fight at 201, but you could see the damage he was doing with those inside leg kicks. Masvidal will really plant that left lead leg and opens himself up to those kicks, to those inside leg kicks that Donald Cerrone will not be shy about initiating. That could be a factor in this particular fight. And a factor for all of these fighters is the fact that this is at elevation, and that's definitely of importance here. And you saw on the Road to the Octagon special, Masvidal going to Colorado early, Shevchenko spending her whole camp there in preparation. Julianna Pena spoke to one of my colleagues, Cody Saftik, this week, stating she's been there for 3 weeks leading up to this. Shevchenko spent her whole camp there over Christmas. This fight was announced at the beginning of December, so she has been there acclimating herself. And also in the interview you heard, initially from Kyrgyzstan, which was another part of the world at elevation. So Shevchenko, you have to favor her in that regard for this fight. It's 5 rounds, our main event, Shevchenko and Julianna Pena. This is a very difficult fight for both, I feel. Shevchenko showed a lot of patience against Holly Holm, and that was her first 5-round fight in mixed martial arts. And she let Holly Holm come to her very smart on the counters, very effective, was not rushing through anything. If anything, it was Holly Holm that was rushing and playing into Shevchenko's game plan. Will Julianna Pena do the same? If we see that Shevchenko, then this is going to be a rough night for Julianna Pena. And the fact Pena has never gone 5 rounds, that's a question. Pena will have a reach advantage of 4.5 inches in this particular fight. I feel the key here is Julianna Pena's ability to take down Shevchenko. What Amanda Nunes was able to do to Shevchenko last March during those first 2 rounds is what Pena needs to do in this fight, where Nunes dominated her in those first 2 rounds before Shevchenko came back and won the 3rd round in their fight at UFC 196. I feel Julianna Pena, who has a ton of strength, the way she is able to use her double underhooks and control the body and take it to the mat, that's going to be key in this fight, and how Shevchenko can either stay away from the clinch game of Julianna Pena and counter as she enters. That's going to be pivotal in this particular fight. The longer this goes, I think you favor Shevchenko, but it's deep waters that we haven't seen Pena go into, and maybe she's going to be completely fine with a 25-minute fight. I do feel the winner of this fight should be fighting Amanda Nunes next, even if it's Shevchenko who has that loss against Nunes. I think there's enough doubt because of the fact that it would now be a 5-round fight, and you go and watch that first fight. I mean, the second round was a 10-8 Nunes round, but the third was Shevchenko's round, and certainly it's not the most appealing and marketable main event of Nunes-Shevchenko 2, but it certainly, from a merit standpoint, I think is viable for Shevchenko to get that opportunity to avenge that loss and challenge for the title. My pick is Julianna Pena in this fight. I've been very impressed with what she has done, and it's difficult to assess where she is relative to the very best in the division. Defeating Milana Dudieva in impressive fashion is one thing. Then defeats Jessica Ai. Kat Zingano, who was off of a long layoff at UFC 200, and that was a fight where Zingano certainly had her moments in. Shevchenko is a different level from all of those fights. So this is going to be, if Julianna Pena wins this fight, she deserves that title fight. I don't think there is any argument against it of who's available at 135 pounds. My official pick, Julianna Pena. Very difficult fight, though. I think that those top 2 fights, they can go either way. We shall see on Saturday night. That's going to wrap up the show. I want to thank our guests, Valentina Shevchenko and Josh Gross, for joining us. We'll be back next week. We'll discuss the fallout of the UFC on Fox card from Denver, Colorado. And looking ahead, next weekend is their card in Houston, which is headlined by Dennis Bermudez and the returning Korean zombie Chan Sung Jung, who has not fought since August of 2013, and now they are headlining a card in Houston, Texas at the Toyota Center, no less. Very big venue. We will chat about that next week, and whatever other news occurs over the next 7 days. You can subscribe to this show so you never miss an episode. Just look up the MMA Report with John Pollock on iTunes, and if you are so obliged, leave us a rating as well on iTunes. It does help with visibility of the show and personally enhances my ego. So by all means, the MMA Report with John Pollock on iTunes. You can also contact me on Twitter at @IamJohnPollock, and we will chat with you next week. The show drops every Thursday at FightNetwork.com, and you can now get the show on YouTube at YouTube.com/FightNetwork. Again, out every Thursday, and we will chat with you next Thursday.